Hi, welcome back. This is project number 16, the necklace clasp in Alan Revere's professional jewelry making. Let's get started. To start, I have some 0.7 millimeter sheet. Now that is in between 20 and 22 gauge. Matter of fact, it's approximately 21 gauge. So you can either take your sheet and roll it down, or you can use your 20 gauge or 22 gauge. Just realize that there'll be a little bit of difference in that if you do. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of find out, I need two 10 millimeter circles. So first thing I'm going to do is measure the width of my sheet here. In this case, I'm 24.9, so I could easily fit both of these in here if I'm really careful. If I'm a little bit concerned, maybe I'll go a little bit longer on that way. So the next thing I'm going to do though is I need to be able to fit a 10 millimeter circle in here. So I'm going to set my caliper a little larger than that. In this case, not quite 13 millimeters. And I'm just going to scribe myself a quick line. And that's going to give me kind of an outside so that I know where to kind of work in within this. The next thing I'm going to do is give myself a crosshair. And that will allow me to get everything kind of centered. So I'm just going to use my scribe here. And I'm going to just create a very simple crosshair. And that way now I have a center point that I'm after. And this may be a little bit difficult to see on the video. But anyway, so I'm going to take my center punch or my scribe, and I'm just going to create a little divot right here in the center of that. And what that's going to allow me to do is to either use my calipers or my dividers and hold that into place while I create this circle. Now I found that my particular dividers are kind of crappy. So what I've decided to use instead is to use my calipers. And the thing that's kind of nice about using my calipers here is that I can set my number exactly to where I need it to be. So in order for me to get a 10 millimeter circle, I need to set a 5 millimeter radius. So I'm going to open this up to 5 millimeters. And I'm going to set one of the points of that leg right into that center point that I have created, and I'm going to hold it right into there. Then I'm going to use the rest of the other leg, and I'm going to spin my metal around so that I've got a nice circle. Hopefully you guys can see that there. Now the next thing that I need to do is create another one. So again, I'm going to take my little center punch and divider or scribe, and I'm going to create another hole or kind of a center mark there. And once again, I'm going to just hold my caliper into place, and I kind of slid out just a little bit right there. So come back in and remark. Okay, so now I actually have my two circles here. Now the one circle is going to be kind of that top part that we dome a little bit. The other part still needs to have a little bit more work. And one of the things that this other circle needs is to have a 4 millimeter circle, or a 8 millimeter rather. So I'm going to do a 4 millimeter on the inside to create that smaller circle. Now once we have the two circles, and I have an 8 millimeter and a 10 millimeter circle on the one, and then just the 10 millimeter on the other. That 10 millimeter one, we're not really going to do anything more with him, but we still have a little bit more that we need to do inside of this one. We have a few areas that we are going to pierce out. Now really, you could pierce any kind of design you want, but we're going to stick with the design that's in the book for now. So first thing I need to do is set my caliper back down a little bit further to 1.2 millimeters. And what we are going to do with that one is create a hole right in the middle of our piece. And by doing it at 1.2 millimeters, that's going to give us a 2.4 circle, or 2.4 millimeter circle. Okay, and now we have that. Then I'm going to change my divider just a little bit to 1.7 millimeters. And we're going to create 4 arcs, kind of a semi-arc. So now I've created these 4 spots on here by doing a crosshair. And what I'm going to do is rest the tip of the caliper right onto kind of where that crosshair crosses down and intersects with that inner 4 millimeter, or that 8 millimeter circle rather. And again, I'm just going to place the caliper right onto that and bring my metal around and create a small arc. And hopefully you guys can kind of see this here on the video. There you go. So you can kind of see that. And I'm going to do the same thing at each one of these intersection points. So now I have something that looks a little bit like this, where each of these circles or half circles kind of intersect with and are centered with this crosshair that we have here. And now we're going to pierce all of that out. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a center punch and punch into each one of these and drill a little hole. Now before I pierce this out, you can see I've got my holes drilled at this point, but I want to attach the copy of my little catch, and that I'm just going to glue onto my piece. Now to do this, there's a number of ways you can do that. You can use a glue stick, you can use white glue, you can always print it off and put it on, like print it onto like a sticky label type of thing, but I really like this method. It's one that I've used for many, many years now, and I just take a little bit of rubber cement and put a very, very light coat on it. And I put a light coat also on the back of my design. And what I'm going to do is just let that all dry, and then I will put the 2 pieces together, and they bond really tightly and really well. It's kind of like a dry mounting. So get that into position, and then I can remove the rest of that glue. And now it's not going to move around. If I were to try to do this before this glue completely dried on both sides, and then I just put it on, that glue would stay tacky and my piece would tend to move around. But if you allow them both to dry like that, it usually creates a really nice tight bond. So now we're ready to pierce out all 3 parts. Before I do that though, I am going to drill a small hole into where we're going to have our catch. Now you can decide what you want to cut out first. Because I have so much leverage here with my metal, I'm going to cut out this first, and then I'll come over here and I'll cut out the insides of our catch. So the first thing I want to do is cut out the inside hole of that part of the catch. So get my blade in here, make sure we've got enough there. And this shouldn't take too much. And I want to be just kind of cautious and careful with how I'm piercing this. Next, I'm going to take a variety of files and clean up the piercings. And then I'm also going to clean up the outside edges. Now with this little hook here, we need it to be really hard. So I just cut this out of the same sheet as my other stuff, so I'm going to harden this a little bit with one of my nylon dead blow hammers. And that should help us have a little bit of that springiness to it so that when we insert it into our clasp, it's going to spring back open. Now that these elements are done, there's a few more things that need to happen. We need to create the supports inside of this that are going to allow our hook to catch into place, as well as we need to dome our outer piece so that it has just a slight difference to it on its height. Now the additional components that I'm going to need is a 0.8 millimeter wire that is square, one that is round, and I'm going to also use that round wire to create a 1.8 millimeter jump ring. Now to get the 1.8 millimeter jump ring, what I did was I found a drill bit that is 1.6 millimeters. So by using one that is 1.6 millimeters, there's a little bit of spring back, and that is going to give me the measurement that I need for this. So now that I've got that little jump ring coil made, I'm going to use a size 8/0 saw blade and cut out one of my jump rings, and I will be able to use that for my clasp. For the next part, we're going to solder the different elements onto our bottom piece here, and this is going to allow us to have a little bit of space between the top and the bottom, as well as allowing that mechanism to kind of come in here and click into place. First thing I need to do is solder on 3 different prongs or kind of posts, and I'm going to place them and center them in between the top 2 kind of these little connection points here, as well as right here in the center on the bottom. So to help me with that, so what I'd like to do is just take a permanent marker and maybe create a mark of where I'm going to solder these elements. Now the thing with these is that we are actually going to solder these elements kind of on the edge of the piece itself, so that it's kind of balanced on there, half on and half off. That can be a little bit tricky. So I like to use a couple of different tools to help me hold those into place. Here I've cut 3 pieces of 0.8 millimeter wire, and again that's approximately 20 gauge, kind of in that area. Now what I'm going to do is I like to apply my solder to the ends of these first, and then I'll come back and hold them into place and allow that solder to flow onto our back plate. So what I've done here is I have my 3 pieces and I hang them over the edge of my charcoal block. I also have 3 pieces of solder. They are not too close to each other so as that I don't kind of damage those when I do my soldering. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to dip it into some flux, and then I'm going to place it right here onto my piece of solder. So the next thing I'm going to do is heat up my torch, and I want to come in on that little piece of solder and that wire, and I want to just kind of flow that just barely onto the end of my wire, like so. And I know that's a little difficult to see because it's a bit small, but that solder is now on the end of that wire, and that's what I want to see. So again, I'm going to place that over here. Now be very careful because that is now hot. I'm going to repeat that for the other 2 pieces. And now these are ready to go. For this next stage, what I'm going to do is get my piece fluxed up. And then I'm going to position these and hold them into place with various pairs of tweezers. Now this can be the part that gets very difficult. And my goal here is to get these positioned so that the wire is half on and half off the edge of my piece. And take your time here to make sure everything is positioned where you want it. I want a much softer flame on this because if we get too hot, it will just melt our wires. I want to concentrate more on that back plate and letting that heat kind of work its way up those wires. And that will help flow that solder. There's one. Second one. And there's my third. So this is a very gentle operation, so you want to be very cautious not to overheat anything. And now this seems to be stuck to the board because of the flux. So whenever I need to knock that loose, I'm just going to apply a little bit of heat. It's going to help soften up that flux, and then I can move this. Now that these are all soldered, I'm going to take this and pickle it, and we'll come back and finish it up. The next thing I need to do is put my square spacers into place. Now, because these other pieces here are so tall, they might actually be a little difficult to deal with. So I'm going to cut them down just a little bit, not quite down to size yet where I'm going to need them, but down a little bit so they're not quite so much in my way. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to place these square spacers. Now I want these to be about 4.5 millimeters apart when they are placed onto our piece. So what I did was I scribed a line to about the 4.5 millimeter mark. Now this is where it kind of gets tricky and things kind of want to move around, so you're going to have to spend a little bit of time here attempting to get this just right. All right, I have my solder in position as well, and again I'm going to come in with a light flame. I'm just going to very gently heat the piece up. I want to be very cautious because I don't want these spacers to kind of bubble out of space or out of place. Now you saw that these got a little bit warm and the prongs began to kind of tip and fall. I'm not too worried about that at this point because they were still a little bit long, and that's actually okay. Nothing moved out of place too much. So I think we're actually okay. So next I want to take my top piece and I want to create just a little shallow dome on that. So I'm going to put this into my dapping block. I want to pick one that's, again, not too big, so you can see it's just going to give us a very shallow impression on this. I want to take a punch that will fit nicely in here, not too snug, and then just tap it down a little bit. And we have ever so slight of a dome on that, and that's what I want to see. Now I want this to solder into place nicely, and so what I'm going to do is just create a flat bottom to this. So I've put it onto some sandpaper, and I'm going to just run this kind of in a figure 8. And every now and then I'll check the bottom of this to see that we've got a nice flat facet that we've created. Here it's getting started, so I've got a good contact all the way around, but I'm going to continue this for just a little bit more and give it a little better surface. And I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I don't know if you guys can see this on the video or not, but we've got a nice even flat facet all the way around the edge. While I was soldering, I happened to notice that these little bars kind of moved in a little bit. So very carefully, I took a saw and just sawed the end of that, and then also along the bottom to kind of open this up so that I now have my 4.5 millimeter opening right here between these. Now what you can do at this point is you can take your hook part, and I can bring that in here like so, and we can test it to see if it's going to fit into place. And you should be able to probably even tell if you're going to get your click or not, because that's the real goal, is you want to hear that click into place right there. Now this kind of pops up, so you know we don't have that right now at this point, but I can see that this is going to work. When we have our top portion soldered onto this, that's going to hold this down into place a little bit better, so it's not going to pop above these rails. And we know that we're going to hold into place where we need to. So the next thing that needs to happen is I need to trim down these posts so that they are also the 0.8 millimeters. So that way then it's going to be flush with my hook here and also my little jump ring that we are going to be soldering into place. So to trim these into the right place, I'm actually going to use my hook kind of as a guide, basically, because we want to basically cut them to the same height as this, which is going to give us that 0.8 millimeters. So what I can do is just place those down, bring my cutter in on top of this, and then just clip it away. And we don't want to be lower than that. Matter of fact, if anything, you want to still be just a little bit higher. And that is because we are going to sand it down so everything works out to be the same height when we're done. Okay. So everything at this point, we definitely are up a little bit still, and that's perfect. So what I'm going to do now is bring in my sanding paper. Now this is 320 grit, and what I'm going to do is sand everything down so that it all is the same height. So I'm just going to run this into a figure 8. Every now and then I want to check to see. So what I'm looking for is to see that the sandpaper has removed these, and I want to see it where it gets to even down here on these flat bars. Notice that I run in a figure 8, and that is going to help me keep that pressure correct. Every now and then, move how you're holding this so that you really do change the pressure on that. Looks like I'm starting to hit these flat bars. Everything is looking good here, so we've got just a little bit more to go. At this point, everything is now that same level. Pretty happy with that. You can take and test fit the top of your piece on here. And notice that I've left these bars a little bit longer, and that is so that I can apply solder to them and it will flow into this. Then we will cut it away and file it down all the way around the outer edge. So even these little posts that we have stick out ever so slightly. It's a little hard to see here on the video, but they do. And again, that's so that we can get that solder to kind of flow into the top part for that. Now, before we solder this into place, what we need to do is to place that small jump ring here on the top. So we're going to place it opposite of our little post or peg that we have down here. When I get this onto my solder pad, it might be handy to actually have something that, again, is just a little bit thinner maybe than what we're dealing with, to hold that ring up so that when we solder it, it will be correctly positioned. So what I'm going to do now is position everything. So I want this ring to be in about the center between these two top posts here. And I'm pretty happy with that. Then I'm also going to make sure that everything is fluxed. So I want to flux these where it's going to join. Notice that I have a piece of wire up here. And what this wire is just another 0.8 millimeters. So it's the same as my sheet size down here. And I'm using it to kind of prop that ring up just so that it can hold it into place. I'm going to add some flux to each of these posts. And if you want, you could place your solder on each of the posts at this point. It may or may not be a little more difficult that way, but try it and see what works best for you. So I'm just going to put a little tiny piece of solder on each of these posts. And I'm also going to do the same thing on this jump ring. I also want to make certain that the top part here has been fluxed as well. I want to just leave that in position. Now, what I can do here is also apply some solder to these end posts that are sticking out, and the heat will help to draw that solder in and solder those into position. And now we're ready to heat this up and get that solder to flow. Now I don't want these items to move, so I have a very talented friend, William Cobb, who has created a tool called the Will Hold, and this is going to allow me to hold this all into position. And this will allow me to keep my hands free while I heat this up, but yet it will keep the pressure on everything so things do not move. So I'm just going to bring this heat into here, and I'm gently going to warm everything up. I want to be careful because I did use some flux on this, so we want to allow that flux to dry. Once I no longer see any evidence of that flux being wet, then I'm going to bring my heat in, just work it around my piece, and I'm going to watch for the pieces where I know that there is solder and I can see it, and I want to watch for those to flow. You also want to be really gentle around that jump ring so that you don't melt it. Alright, and I saw that melt right there at the jump ring, and I believe that it's just melted there at the posts. It has, and we are done. So you'll notice that we had a little bit of a pink glow there, but nothing too bad. And there is our clasp. So the next thing I'm going to do is quench this, and again pickle it, and we will test to see if everything works. So I've now pulled this out of the pickle. I gave it a quick brush with a brass brush just to see what my surface looks like. I also took my cutters and just trimmed off those square spacers that we had, and now I want to check my hook, make sure that it clicks into place. So going to bring that in here, bring it around, and there's my click. So I'm pretty happy with that. Close that out, pull it back out, and you can test to see if it fits both ways, and ideally everything is lined up. So the next thing that I need to do is I just need to finish up kind of the edge on this. So I want to just support this here on my bench pin, I'm just going to go around that outer edge, make sure everything is nice and even. And we're looking really good. Everything is looking nice and even here. Now we've got the outer surface that has been filed with each other. So it should have a nice finish there as well. And the next thing to do is going to be to finish my top. Now this could be done with any number of different surface treatments that you have, but to start, maybe I will start with just going over it with one of my sanding sticks. So in this case, this happens to be, I believe, at 400 grit for my sanding stick. And you may have to get kind of creative in how you hold your piece, because it's definitely, I mean, look how small that is. 10 millimeters is not very big at all. So do whatever you need to do to get this where you can hold it into place and get your finish on here the way that you desire. And once you have your final finish on both pieces, you can begin to attach this to whatever piece you want, and you are complete. So as you can see, this project is a little bit more involved than some of the others that we've worked on before. Everything up to this point has been developing some of these skills, and then these later projects, project 15, 16, 17, and 18, are definitely going to be quite a bit of a step up in our skill level. So for those of you guys that have been following along, hopefully you're finding it a little bit easier, but it will be something that may still stretch you a bit, as it has for me. Now I know that, again, that everything looks really simple in these videos, but keep in mind, this is probably the third or fourth clasp that I have made before I even jump into doing the videos. So don't be afraid to mess them up. Don't be afraid to try again, because again, that's how you're going to learn and get better. Just kind of pay attention to how the metal moves, pay attention to how your solder flows, where things melt, where things are off when you're sanding or filing or even doing your cutting. And then you can go from there and get better each time. Again, I'm not a master. I'm still working on learning this stuff right along with you. So hopefully you guys will forgive my mistakes, and I will catch you guys on the next video for our next project. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, please help me and my YouTube channel. Give me a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications for when more videos have been posted.